The following is a special video presentation of the Hennepin County Library.
A discussion with Michael James. Today's guest author is a classically trained French chef, the co-founder of the Great Chefs of France School in Napa Valley. This is one of the most unique cooking schools in the country. He's also been a longtime collaborator and a writer with the great Simone Simca-Becht from France, and he's a consultant for restaurants and hotels. In his new book, Slow Food, we're going to learn some wonderful things about what's happening across the country. In fact, he's been called the Charles Kuralt of cuisine, since he traveled all across America, visiting 24 towns to tell us what Americans are eating. And his new book, Slow Food, will tell you about it too. Welcome, Michael.
Good morning.
Good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
It's nice that your roads brought you to Minneapolis and St. Paul.
Well, I'm charmed. I love it here.
And the food is pretty good here, wouldn't you think?
It's very good.
You have had such wonderful experiences. I had a real nostalgia myself reading through the book because you've been everywhere, but you started with an interest in French cooking. Now, when did that begin?
Well, I guess it really began in the late 60s. I was a French major at Berkeley, my hometown, and I discovered Julia Child on television and was smitten.
Julia was there.
Smitten by the great Julia, as so many of us were.
Yes.
And so I bought my first cookbook and my first French pot and a French knife and went to work. And a couple of years later, I wrote Julia a letter because I had made a dessert out of mastering the art of French cooking. It was an apple charlotte, and it kept collapsing on me.
And this was her recipe you
were using.
This was
her recipe,
yes.
And so I thought no one can rescue me but Julia. So I wrote her this letter, and she, and it really changed the course of my life, wrote me this long, very attentive and friendly letter back. And among other things, I asked her what I should do because I spoke French and I loved France. I mean, I loved the idea of France and loved French cooking, thanks to her. And could I go over there and study? What did she think? And she wrote me back this really extraordinary letter and said, "Get yourself over to France, young man, and apprentice yourself to the best chef you can find." And then P.S.
It better be Simca.
Well, and P.S. Here's how you fix the charlotte. And she fixed the apple charlotte, but the thrust of the letter was go to France. So I went to France.
Very encouraging. And what'd your family think? Is this a pretty risky business?
Well, I must really doff my hat to my parents because they were very supportive. They were perplexed also.
Yes.
But I waved Julia's letter in front of them, and
you're way ahead of the trend. I mean, now we're seeing American chefs learning and caring, but that was quite a long time ago to get that much energy to go over to France.
It really was, because it hadn't really yet, the momentum wasn't quite there. It was just...
We didn't know who Paul Bocuse was.
Interest in cooking and French food was still kind of in its infancy back then. So it was unusual. It was a bit of an unorthodox move, but I went off to France with my parents' blessing. And of course, once there, I was young and a little bit green and really was floundering a little bit. And then one day, someone gave me the phone number of a woman named Simone Beck, who, of course, I knew as Julia Child's French partner, but she was kind of a shadowy figure, kind of mythical. She was, in fact, my hero, along with Julia, and I never dreamed that I would meet her or...
Again, the co-author of the cookbook you first cooked with, right?
Yes. Mastering the Art of French Cooking, that's right. And so I can remember distinctly the day I called her, because I was actually ready to throw in the sponge and come home because I hadn't made a lot of headway. In France, you have to have good connections to make headway.
Not much respect for a young American who
Well, long American with long hair, longish hair, and kind of in his student days. And, so I called up Simca out of the blue and sort of addressed her in my best classroom French. And after a few moments, Simca's very forceful, and she said, "Speak English." Anyway, we had I thought when I called Simone Beck, my gosh, I would get the butler or the secretary, or there she was.
Picked up her phone.
Larger than life, even on the telephone.
And I hope you mentioned Julia.
I did.
You did have that
I did.
connection.
And she said, and she gave me an appointment.
Oh,
so I
how
went to see her,
wonderful.
and it was a very fateful meeting because when she walked into her little parlor in Paris, something clicked. There was just that sense of destiny, I think, for both of us. And she sized me up pretty quickly and could tell that I wasn't one of her average American housewives over on for a lark in France to learn cooking, that she sensed that, as I explained, that I had serious intentions of becoming a chef. So she kind of took me under her wing.
Isn't that
And she gave me
wonderful?
some private classes, which she never allowed me to pay for. And then she opened doors for me, which is really what I needed to have happen in France. So I did my apprenticeships in Paris.
This is the early 70s.
This was 1971 and 1972. And every few months we would meet, and she would say, "What have you done? And now you must do this." And she felt that I should be exposed, as any fledgling chef should be, chef apprentice, to various kitchens and to various masters, which is sort of the whole basis of apprenticeship, is exposure to a master.
How did they treat you, the American boy in the kitchen? You did your
Well,
your
but
French.
don't forget, I was an American boy with a French accent.
That helped.
My French was pretty decent.
So they respected you for that.
They respected me for that, and I think it gave me, I was able to make contact.
Well, now we're so lucky because of that connection. 2 years later, you're out on the West Coast, and in '74, you start this unusual, risky cooking school, again with Simone's blessing, correct?
With Simca's Blessing. It was pretty nervy.
How did that
In fact, the
come about?
winemakers of Napa thought it was very nervy.
Oh, I think it's exciting.
Yeah, well, I left France, came home, and I assisted Simca on her cookbook tour. She was just publishing Simca's Cuisine in 1972.
Did she come through America then?
Yes, Simca used to go on these marathon tours across America. She had a whole network, because of her teaching, of American friends.
Oh, in each city.
Yes.
Much like your road book.
Well, that is where this book comes from, because it's because of my travels with Simca down the back roads and into the small towns and small cities of America that I was introduced to regional America.
And
Because
she-
I was a California kid.
Did she also like looking in the regions of America, like
She
they do the
loved
French?
it.
Because the French
she
do that.
conveyed to me her love. Simca had this insatiable curiosity about people, landscapes, food, of course. And she was very unusual for a French woman, because where a lot of French people tend to be, one could say, narrow or more set in their ways food-wise, Simca had this tremendous sense of adventure and curiosity. So that always carried us forward on our travels. And so that was my first taste of kind of regional America, and through Simca, and she really introduced me to those, those other ways of life and the flavors of the different parts of the States. Anyway, so I came back from France, and we did that tour, which was extraordinary, and then my career sort of came to a full stop, and I just felt that I didn't want to embark in any sort of traditional pursuit. I didn't want to do restaurant work, because I'd seen how
Hundreds of hours a
how
week.
rigorous that is,
Oh,
and really
yes.
unfulfilling it can be. Although it can be fulfilling if you have your own place, and but
Was
it's-
Chez Panisse starting at this time in
Chez-
Berkeley?
yes, simultaneous
Okay.
with my sort of
Because
embarking.
Alice Waters is kind of considered a fresh start at that time, and now you're looking at the same thing in the wine country, right?
Exactly. So I got back to California, and while I was in France, I had met a man named Richard Olney, he's kind of he's a legendary person. He's a cookbook writer, but people in the food business really revere him. And he had been escorting groups of Americans through French wineries and giving them French cooking classes in France. And I got back to California, and I thought, wait a minute, here is this astonishing wine country right in our backyard.
Just burgeoning to
Yes,
growing. And,
yes,
oh.
just awakening from
Yes.
a long slumber, really.
And prohibition. Even.
And
Set
prohibition.
them back up many vines.
Yes, that set them back set them back a lot.
Yes.
So why? And there was no good food in the Napa Valley. I mean, I shouldn't say that categorically, but it was, no one had yet was associating good food with good wine to expose the wine. So I thought it seemed like a pretty darn good idea.
Oh, and
So I just, went knocking on doors in the Napa Valley and had a lot of them slammed, because the Napa Valley was a very, kind of closed society back then. And it was a pretty sleepy rural place. And but eventually I found a beautiful property in near Rutherford, which is in the heart of the Napa Valley. And I made a very good friend. I walked one day into the office of Margaret Beaver at the Robert Mondavi Winery. And she was the first person. She looked up from her desk and she gave me a big smile and she said, "Of course, we can do it."
oh, isn't that wonderful?
And, that went on to become a very close working friendship and relationship.
Now, in that last 20-year period, as you explained earlier, Mondavi has maintained the school.
Yes, he has really
continuous.
maintained it and furthered it. And of course, I needed a vehicle for this enterprise. I mean, I needed, what I wanted to do was bring talent from France to teach in the Napa Valley. In other words, have a great French talent, expose Americans to California wine and wonderful food. So I sent Simca a long letter explaining my idea. And she sent me this wonderful, very Simca-esque cable back, which said, all it said was, yes, yes, yes.
Oh,
Simca, when she was emphatic, she was very emphatic.
And she wants to be at the point, evidently.
She loved being on the cutting edge. She loved being in the forefront. She was a front runner.
So it's really
At the
set
age
the
of,
stage.
78 or whatever
Yes.
she was then, 75 maybe. So she came, and we had a huge success because no one had done something of that sort.
Were you drawing American chefs from as far as New York to come to the coast?
Actually,
Or?
in the beginning, it was just, it wasn't for professionals, really.
Oh.
It was just for talented amateurs.
Aficionados. That
Aficionados.
cared about it.
Exactly.
As much
Exactly.
as you had.
And people came from all over the country.
Isn't that wonderful?
And it made headlines all over the country because, it was billed as the $1,500 cooking class, which, the price...
Was that a bum rap? I mean, that is a high price.
Kind of. Well, but that was not the intention. I mean,
You could eat everything too, right?
absolutely. I mean, it was... the price was a consequence of what... the kind of quality that we brought to the project. And it became known in later years as the Great Chefs of France, and other French chefs followed, who I had become acquainted with through Simca, of course, people like Michel Gerard and the Toigreau brothers and Roger Verger. And it was a high time in the Napa Valley in the 70s.
For sure.
It was,
Now, come into the 80s with me and tell me, where were you in that point in your food history before we get to the book? You were writing and touring. Were you cooking or teaching? What was happening with you then?
well, after 10 years in the Napa Valley, I decided to do something else because it was a little like running a Broadway show. It was, after a while you start to feel a little stale, and so
Same old questions from new audience every week, right?
kind of, and it just wasn't as fresh as it once was. The Napa Valley was changing also. It was evolving. It was becoming more commercialized, more familiar. So I turned it over to Robert Mondavi, who has maintained it ever since.
Right.
And I moved to Los Angeles and opened an American pie shop.
Ah.
So I went I really changed gears.
Was pastry one of your specialties?
Yes, always was. I loved to do it, and in fact, when I was 8 years old, that was my first venture into the kitchen, was to make a pie.
I remember doing the same thing. We'd roll out the crust and it would never stay together, and all the fruits you'd try to put in. And
It was always a great challenge.
yes, you're right.
And,
in fact, making a good pie today is still
It is a great
one of
challenge.
the best challenges.
It's a very
because,
delicate operation.
do
Takes
you have a specialty, one pie that stands above all of the rest?
Well, my favorite pies are, I would have to say, two-crust baked fruit pies.
with fruits.
Yeah, with fruit. That's really, those are a joy.
Now, because our time is limited,
Sure.
the pie shop lasted how long?
Well, I was involved with that for a couple of years, and it was just the fulfillment of a fantasy, really.
People could come in and take out or order or eat there?
Yes, and they were real handmade homemade style American pies.
What'd you call it, Michael's Place? Or?
It was called Mike and Billy's American Pie.
Oh, I love
My
it.
partner from the Napa Valley, Billy Cross, opened American Pie with me. And
this was in L.A.?
It was in L.A., it was in...
Not on Melbourne Avenue or something?
No, it was on North Beverly Drive, and it was a sweet little shop. It was all done in pie colors, pie crust and butterscotch and blueberry and raspberry colors.
Sounds wonderful.
And we made these handmade American pies. I trained wonderful Mexican women to roll out pie dough, and so we used no machines, really. And
was any writing going on at this time where you're sharing those recipes?
Not really, but I was thinking about it. I felt that I was not ready yet to be a writer. I felt I had to accumulate a little more experience. But the wonderful thing about the pie shop, which really led to this book, Slow Food, is that people used to come in, and, you know, I had all kinds of customers in the pie shop, but a lot of them were sort of, you know, high-powered Beverly Hills women and, well, people who cared about, I mean, all kinds of people came, but no matter who they were, pie seemed to be this great leveler. And the extraordinary thing was that over the counter, they would sort of lean on their elbow and they'd start telling me about their childhood.
They remember that comfort food, right?
Yes,
they remember
exactly.
something.
This pie, or the prospect of pie, conjured up all these memories of their childhood, of their mothers, of their grandmothers. And I think they were as astonished as I at the emotion in their voices as they would tell me these stories about their upbringing. I never forget, there was a woman who came in one day, a very sleek sort of woman from Malibu, and she started telling me about her upbringing in New Orleans and her housekeeper who would make them a dried peach pie in the dead of winter. And it suddenly occurred to me that food was it triggered something powerful in people, in their memories. Well,
and then we come to the subhead of your book says, Flavors and Memories of America's Hometowns. And if we take a minute to highlight some of the excitement that this brought forth, every single chapter has a photo that is something nostalgic prior to the discussion of the food. And if the camera can catch that little shot.
Those are my doggies on the beach.
I might show one more. This was a shot of the Duchess of Windsor.
That's Wallace Warfield at about the age of 16, yes.
Something of her there. And these are nostalgic and homebody and warm. And tell us this cookbook is not like other cookbooks. I learn about the people and then I learn about their recipe.
Well, I guess you're absolutely right. And it's not really a cookbook. I mean, there are recipes, of course.
And they're wonderfully unique recipes.
Thank you. It's really a collection of stories. It's a collection of stories about small-town America and people's food memories. And so it is nostalgic in that sense. It's about neighborliness and, you know, the togetherness in small towns. And the food sort of brings back the memories, I guess.
You even came to Minnesota.
Even came to Minnesota.
In fact, I wonder how you pronounce Hewitt, Minnesota. Do you think
Hewitt.
that's...
Well, yes, my friend Hallie Heron used to laugh because I used to call it, you know, give it the French spin and call it Uo.
Uo.
And no one ever knew what the heck I was talking about. Of course, it's Hewitt.
And the fun of being in Minnesota was that this was a woman who was experimenting with things from her gardens and her herbs.
Exactly.
And you've, for example, for people who would like to know what kind of thing you'll find, a lavender beef recipe, a Sicilian garlic flan, a basil focaccia, lettuces with unusual roasted peppers. I mean, this is from Minnesota.
Well, not quite.
But we're so excited to see these things.
What I loved about this, about Hallie's story, is that this is a woman who had spent a great deal of time cooking and eating in Italy, a native Californian who moved to Minnesota.
So she brings these flavors with her.
Yes, to bring and brought those flavors with her. And that's what happens in America. That's how our food changes and moves, is that because we're a restless kind of country. And as people move, so does the food. And then new traditions.
On the other hand, we see vanilla ice cream and chocolate frosting from Dave and Larry. Now, who are Dave and Larry?
Oh, well, Dave Beckwith is
Davenport, Iowa.
Davenport, Iowa. And Larry is his mother.
Oh!
Loretta Beckwith, but her nickname was Larry.
I love it.
So, yeah, this was the story of a young man growing up in Davenport and learning cooking in his mother's kitchen.
and they have some of the chocolate things for people who love chocolate. I also saw some unusual ones. You had is it Patsy Cline's mother?
Yes,
Did some
exactly.
unusual. Here's a
Patsy's
great
mom.
photo of an old Cadillac in somebody's country parade.
That's a really
You got a story on that
fabulous photograph. Yeah, well, that's Patsy Cline riding in the Apple Blossom Parade in Winchester, Virginia, which was her hometown. And she's riding in that wonderful 55 Cadillac with the Melody Playboys.
one? Oh, I love it.
That
And
was just at the start of her
She
career.
wanted some kind of food in the hospital that her mother made, and she snuck it up to her.
Yeah, well, she was involved in a pretty terrible car accident
That's right.
in the late 50s, I believe it was. Actually, early 60s. And it was a Seventh-day Adventist hospital and, of course, a vegetarian diet. And I guess after a few weeks, Patsy was fit to be tied. So her family smuggled in food to give her some comfort and help her heal.
Well, talk about comfort food. I want to tell you the name of this favorite of Patsy Cline's: fried chicken salad with mustard greens and boiled dill dressing. Now, I read through this recipe, and my first thought was, what a fun way to use chicken. And then I wondered if you made some of these recipes as you wrote about them, if you tested it, and tasted
sure,
it, and
yeah.
what were your impressions of all these flavors together? And did you leave the crust on the chicken too? I mean, we think of chicken salad, we get little cubes.
Little dainty cubes.
They're very processed. They're very boring.
This is not dainty
You said
chicken.
use your fingers, rip the chicken apart.
Yeah.
You gave me some excitement to make the salad.
Yeah,
And,
exactly. That's a wonderful idea. It's, you know, because of course you can use leftover fried chicken, which a lot of times you have the next
Sure.
day. Something different to do with cold fried chicken. But
and then you get the crunch too.
yet
With
well,
skin.
the crunch is the beauty of it. And
We
that's-
don't have to throw skin out then on every meal.
well, you know, I'd say that's an option. But
Another thing I thought was fun, because I've been a fan of Italian food, which is coming on strong in many, many areas. I'm sure you've been following that. The little biscotti, which is always much too tough for me. It's that little hard, crispy cookie. I noticed that in the recipe that Hallie had, you said that you can have a chewier biscotti. You don't have to put it back in the oven to
oh,
dry
that's
it
right.
out
She
twice.
gives you two solutions. One is to dry it out, and another is to just let it air dry it.
And I thought that was
room
kind of,
temperature.
I mean, you have a lot of asides and tips that it must have been something you thought would be helpful for the reader then after they see the recipe?
Absolutely. I mean, because this is very personal food, so I felt that it should really express each person that I was writing about. So I let them really be sort of expressive that way. And then, of course, my background as a cook, I was able to draw them out and really find out what made these dishes personal and made them very much their own.
Maybe we should tell the people about the great one with the buffalo for 5,000.
Oh yeah, the
I mean,
bear stew for 4,000.
Bear stew, just in case we want a big party. I mean, how did that unusual story come about?
Well, that was really just.
Is this the salmon spirit one too?
Yes,
okay.
that's where the bear stew. Well, there's also a recipe for bear stew for 4 to 6.
Okay, so you can cut it down to size.
Well, yeah, there's
Or
this,
anywhere in between.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean bear stew for 2,000.
It looked like a
There's a
personal
man-
letter here.
It is a personal letter from my old pal Beck up in Washington, and she attended a salmon festival up there, and she wrote me a letter, wonderfully entertaining letter about it. But that led me to this man named Ron Pittman, who lives in McCleary, Washington, and every year he makes bear stew for 4,000 because they have a bear festival, which is, it's not as as cruel as it might sound if you're sensitive to wildlife
Just
concerns.
old bears and roadkill, right?
Well, no, actually, it's an Indian celebration of the bounty of nature and how bear was linked to their essential food source.
Well, they treat it with great respect.
Treat it with great respect. It was to celebrate and thank, express thanks for.
I remember one of the recent movies
that
that they
abundance.
bury the bear's head, and they took, they used every part of the bear, the skin and the claws and whatever.
Sure, very respectful.
And you wrote the recipe the way it was explained to you, but you could also add beef. For those
Well,
of us who-
yes, and I should say that because the bear is so gamey that it's it's mostly beef with just some bear added for flavor, and I guess ritual tradition. But yes, I thought the recipe for 4,000 was so comical. It was too good to pass up.
Well, and that's what I thought the joy of reading this book was, the constant flavor of the people along with the flavor of the food.
Oh,
You've
the flavor
captured
of the
it so
people
well.
is intertwined with the flavor
You let
of
them
the
speak
food.
for themselves and some of their jargon and your little personal insight. Now, how much time was taken for research and travel?
Well, I would say it's really an accumulation of maybe my 20 years in on the road and cooking on the road, and but actual research and writing, probably 2 years.
We are going to get Charles Kuralt to talk to you, aren't we?
I sure hope so.
I mean,
I would
it's
be
his kind of
thrilled.
story. I mean, you have done your homework.
Well, he is my hero.
He is.
And
huh?
I must say that he really was one of my great inspirations.
Well, that's good. Between him and Simone, you had the thing covered.
Yeah, I really did. I was very fortunate. I had really a charmed life and career.
Now, you're doing some book tours around the country yourself.
right.
And what will we see for Michael James in the next decade? Are you going to continue with writing? Have you got the bug?
I've got the bug. I definitely have the bug, and who knows, there may be a son of slow food.
Can you do something for us on how to cook Italian when you really can't afford to go there? I mean, maybe give us some help there?
Maybe so,
Okay.
as long as I get to go there.
It's a deal. We're hearing so many good things about food, and I can't think of a book that is more fun for a gift or for yourself. It's called Slow Food with the little subtitle, Flavors and Memories of America's Hometown. You can find it in your bookstores and at the local library. Thank you, Michael. It's fascinating.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Fattening, too, right?
Hopefully.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.